I don't have a bell, so, it's, 20 after, we don't have a huge agenda to tackle, but I thought we'd, go ahead and get started. Feel free if you haven't got anything to eat or drink, to know about, obviously this is, we want this to be informal and useful and generating good conversations and networking, so, welcome everybody. Scan the QR code to register your attendance. Please do so. This is part of the PVP, so make sure you get credit for being here. And thanks for being here, by the way. For those of you who I haven't met, I don't think there are many of you in the room, but I'm Matt Bassey. I'm the PMD at Northeast Georgia. And the chair of the Trauma Medical Director Subcommittee or Committee of the Trauma Commission. As you guys know, I want to start by introducing Lynn Grant. Lynn is the chair of the GCTE committee, and she and I talked yesterday, and it seems like we always have something similar on each of our agendas when we do our report outs and talk about what we're working on. So what we want to do is kind of establish a little bit of crosstalk between our committees. One, selfishly for me, I kind of want to model out how we operate as far as how that committee operates. We've been incredibly successful and productive in terms of getting things done for the state. And I would like to establish a similar model for us. So selfishly for me, I want to pick her brain always. But I do think there's a lot of things that we can do together. And if nothing else, we avoid each other reinventing the wheel twice. So Lynn, thanks for coming, and look forward to a lot more collaboration in the future. So with that being said, again, I think a lot of us in the room know a lot of us in the room, but I don't think any of us in the room know everybody in the room. So I want to just let everybody do a quick introduction, name, place, and then we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Alexa Smith. I'm the Associate TMD for GCLIP. I will be taking over the next year or so from Dr. Rob Collar. I'm a bit of a pneumatic surgeon right now. I'm at MCG doing pediatric surgery, and Dr. Bassey at adult surgery.
Jim Dunn, Trauma Medical Director of Savannah.
Elizabeth Benjamin. Wow. Trauma Medical Director at Grady.
Ian Mohalalik, TMD in Mental Medical Center.
Benji Christie from Macon, Georgia, Associate Trauma Director, and I'm the State Chair for the new trauma.
This is Ashley, Medical Director in Macon at Atria Health Absent. Christie.
I'm back here on the second tier. Kelly Mayfield from Redmond and Rome.
Hey, good morning, John Paul Dillon, the Trauma Medical Director at Fairview Park in Dublin, Georgia.
Leon Dent, TMD, Albany, Georgia, TD, Putnam, Memorial.
Aviva Bashana, the Trauma Medical Director at Worcester Aniston.
Will Hartman, Trauma Medical Director at Hamilton Medical Center in Dalton. B. Homespun, Medical Director at JMS Augusta. Good morning, I'm Barry Renz, TMD at Wellstar Cobb.
Mike McKinney, TMD at Atria Health Floyd.
James Davis, TMD, Mount Austin, Georgia, South Georgia Medical Center.
Karina Kafari, TMD Piedmont Henry.
Heather Martin, TMD Medical Center in Cedartown, Georgia.
David Garnier, TMD at Showa at Scotch Bay.
And Justice Brown, TMD at Choa, Arthur and Blank.
Dave Kiefer, the TMD at Effingham Hospital.
Kevin Horde, TMD at Paulding Hospital in Ireland.
Alicia Register, the TMD at Chris Regional down in Cordova, Georgia.
Sienna Bender, TMD at Archbold, Palestine.
Courtney Pettiford, TMD at Others Hospital, Augusta.
Robin Ackley, TMD at Children's Hospital of Georgia in Augusta, Georgia.
Eliza Fox, TMD at, Wellstar MCG, also in Augusta, Georgia.
Rudy B. Harrison, TND at Moment Medical.
Full Star Spalding and Griffin.
Mark Minock, TMD, Piedmont Walton, Monroe.
All right, thanks, guys. Who do we have online? Anyone, log in? Okay.
Hey, this is Ashley Gore, TMD at Wellstar, West Georgia.
Follow.
Jacob Holloway, MD at Wellstar North Fulton.
Okay. All right, well, this was, one of the things that we want to do for this meeting is, kind of get a COT update. I know, Dr. Christie and I were just talking before we got started about kind of the evolution of both of those committees. Up until a year or two ago, they were kind of almost exactly the same thing. And I know when I first moved to Georgia, joined in at Northeast Georgia, the way that my boss got me hooked into the commission was by joining the COT. So now that we're kind of at least officially separate, I think there's some opportunities. So Dr. Christie's going to maybe introduce what the COT is up to, and maybe we can discuss some of those opportunities.
Too loud, too close, good. So we, I'm not sure, I recognize a tremendous amount of faces in the audience, and I don't want to belabor anyone with information that would be considered remedial, but I do feel like, those who may not know, just a brief kind of hip bone connected to the leg bone kind of thing as it relates to the anatomy of the COT might be a benefit. I don't necessarily have slides, I don't have data, I don't have anything that, relates you up with. But if you are so interested, ultimately the purpose of this is really a question that won't necessarily be answered today, but we thought about today going forward. So the COT is a national organization that is an out-of-profit of the American College of Surgeons, which serves really as a governing body for education, for legislation, for lobbying, for really all surgery, all proceduralists that have been out for time. The COT, some 38 years plus years ago, was developed to really establish a national network for standardizing care, providing education resources, and facilitating the development of more maturing systems within each state that ultimately can cascade across the United States, now actually have a global presence. So while there's a national central COT, each part of the country is divided into a region. Imagine we're in the Southeast region, which is Region 4. Within our region are multiple states, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. I believe there's like 14 total regions. In each region, within each state, there is a committee that is composed of ideally a chair and then whatever infrastructure the chair can sort of muster up. We have vice chairs in the state of Georgia, three of which are actually in the room. Dr. Richard, and Dr. Bassett, and there are others. But the purpose of each state chair and committee is to, if this sounds familiar, work to establish projects, identify state needs, facilitate the distribution of resources and education, to cultivate an environment of learning and interest, to develop leaders, to develop a better sort of horizon for the state as it relates to management and implementation. Each state reports up to each region. Each region reports up to the central COT, and at the central COT, there's an inordinate amount of opportunity as it relates to maturing our systems in our individual hospitals. There are committees that are forward-thinking, and there are committees that are very kind of granular. There are committees that plan for future 10 years from now. There's committees that plan for something as inherent as billing and coding for this upcoming legislative cycle that comes out of Washington. And so it's a big, expansive, network, right? And, within each state, states are ultimately responsible for reporting the progress and lack of progress in the area. Now, to be fair, Georgia is a high-performing state, and which I'll be proud and thankful, the commission's, activities, qualify the state as being one of the best in the country. Up there with Pennsylvania, with Michigan, and other high-performing states. But I bring up, those great states, and I'll compare them to another state who, mean nothing disparaging about it, but if you think of like North Carolina, right? Think of the academic firepower up there. You got Duke, you got Wake, you got USC, you got financial juggernaut, Charlotte, the Patriot. And they actually, all they have is a few people on their COT, that work, best they can, sort of like, map, and they try to create the most meaningful impact they can, in their state, and they struggle. New money, don't have any legislative traction, and they have a lot of envy of it's like ours. And so, as we talk as a region, as we talk as a national COT, I recognize that all of us do that the nation's problems are maturity. The COT's emphasis on problem solving is maturity. And one thing that necessarily hasn't matured in our state is really the relationship of the COT with the Trauma Commission. And so, because we have so many shared interests and commitments to the injured patient and certainly to the well-being of us within our state, the real question is, is there an opportunity to create some durable connectivity between the COT and its functionality with the Trauma Commission to explore options? That's really the thrust of my thoughts on paper right now. But in terms of reporting, there's a meeting in Chicago next week, which is the Spring COT, the Global ATLS Symposium, which I'm happy to report back after. But I did, Matt and I talked about opportunities to work together over the last year, and I talked to other, commission members, and I wanted to take the opportunity to bring it, formally to a group, put it in commitments, and be happy to facilitate any discussion. So, that's really all I have. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to tell you what I know.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Christie. Any questions, comments, ideas, how collaboration can look, or what that might look like moving forward?
I'll speak up. Do I need the mic for them to hear virtually? Is there anybody?
It should pick up. Yeah.
Okay. So, I attend both these meetings and the GSAC summer meetings that have always been down in St. Simons in August, the ones that we used to do together. And so this past year was one of the first years, or at least the first time I've ever been, that it's been separate from GQIP. And what I see as the two separate purposes of GQIP is we're going to talk about data and validating our data and what are our numbers, but we don't talk a lot about the clinical side, like the clinical research. And that's where I see the COT coming in, is so we don't lose that clinical forefront in Georgia. We're doing some awesome work with improving patient care by our efforts, but what I haven't seen that used to be a very big part of that meeting is like the resident competitions and like the clinical research. And that's what I personally would love to see happen more in Georgia. Because if not, then we're going to fall behind in that aspect.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about paper competition, how that comes about. I know being involved with the COT, regional COT in other regions early in my career, you've seen one regional paper competition, you've seen one regional paper competition. How does it usually work out for us?
So somewhere in the spring, just just start talking about it. There'll be a call for abstracts, and then ultimately, as all abstracts be reviewed by the Committee on Trauma, the vice chairs, and any executive committee members, whatever committee structures at the time. And select number, say we get 15, usually have time for about 8 abstracts, just in terms of the ability and time restraints as it relates to presentation. For a long time, I actually resident when COT and the resident paper competition used to be held at different facilities, and actually, I think Barry was a long time ago, might have graded one of my presentations. And we've had at Augusta, we had at Macon, we had at Grady, and I don't exactly remember the date, but the COT sort of dovetailed with the GSACS meeting and was ultimately like the Friday before Saturday, since before GSAC started. And there was usually invited speaker, there was a series of updates from different hospitals, and then the paper competition, which once the meeting's concluded, paper competition's concluded, a winner, a second place winner is awarded, one for clinical science, one for basic science ideally. Basic science winner and the clinical science winner gets to then they were eligible to participate in the region paper competition, which then will be held by whatever stage is sequence of assignment. It's basically alphabetical. It was in Kentucky last year. It was actually in Macon the year before that. And that host will host the region paper competition, and then the winner of that goes on to the national paper competition. So that's the paper competition piece. As an overview.
And that's the nationals at the spring meeting.
The nationals at spring meeting, right?
Yes. So you get a cycle in spring, and if you're ultimately good enough, you'll do the same presentation the next spring.
That's correct. Yeah. And the that meeting sequence, then at some point, then this is probably better story than but then the GQuip and the Trauma Commission, everybody decided we should work together, and which is a good idea. And then over the last couple of years, it seemed like that opportunity kind of eroded a little bit for reasons that Dr. Register pointed out. There might have been 2 different kind of meeting interests, but hopefully, with the paper competition being a focal point for the state's responsibilities, that is also, one of the big criteria for every state required to participate in. If nothing else, maybe that could be some of the collective good to rally to conclude upon.
I would say, Alicia, that when I joined the team in January, which was 2 weeks ago, that was one of my first questions, because it was great having all the residents there, and I'm great clinically, you gotta, data has to drive, that is a natural relationship, and making sure that we talk about how our data affects us clinically, I think is incredibly important, and then what that brings to value to our system. I will tell you, this year, the GSACs is difficult because they went to third Amelia Island, so we can't join them, is what I was told this year, because it's out of state. So, but I hear you loud and clear, and I absolutely agree that it's a great idea. And I don't know what barriers it seems like a natural fit, right? I mean, we're kind of all doing the same. And that tends to be that fragmentation that we all see both in healthcare or their hospitals, but in these meetings, and we're all going to meeting after meeting. Do you see any barriers, Dr. Christie, that just kind of making sure we join forces?
I'm sure there are barriers that I can see. Part of it is, full disclosure, I'm actually the incoming president of the GSACS organization, so got to be very balanced here. From a meeting attendee and recruitment standpoint, having a COT presence coupled with GSACS does bring residents, it brings faculty, and it brings that kind of opportunity for scholastic and academic advantage, which helps the GSACS side of things, to be honest with you. In terms of would it be any different here, I don't think so. I mean, meeting fatigue does come to mind, quite honestly. We get one more to do, and there's, there are some limitations, some travel, some financial, specifically for residents and other students, and even faculty. But those are the two big things. Now, politically, I'm sure there are things that do exist that certainly deserve discussion and transparency to better understand. But those are the big things. Are they insurmountable barriers? No. Yeah, would they deserve, it'd be a great thing to sort of honestly set out and from district parties.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the biggest barrier is, two different organizations, two different meetings, but all the players are the same. And so that's tough. It kind of forces most of us to make a choice of which I'm going to participate in the most meaningfully this year or next year. But I think one of the things that I wanted to accomplish by having you in the room is try to make that barrier as small as possible, as we possibly can. Ideas on how to do that are certainly welcome.
Another question I feel like I'm loudly. I was wondering if there's an opportunity, I think sort of through this group and next door group and combined with COT, to move the needle again on like regionalization of resources. I look at Georgia and, we definitely within different pockets of the state struggle with different subspecialty care and with the current, especially as everybody's now ACS verified, fantastic. But I wonder if there's a way that we can partner a bit better with the COT to have that regionalization kind of work into the next iteration of the verification process. Because I think that we have a lot of resources within our state, but I don't think our state is alone in having these huge rural areas, and it just doesn't make sense to have, a density of those specialty resources. Anyway, I just feel like the whole topic of regionalization of resources and having sort of transfer commitments and stuff within our state is something that we shared nationally. I wonder if there's a way to.
Yes, actually, and then in the state, several years ago, we had a very nice conference call. Chris Dente, who is the current region chief for the COT, put together. I don't know, about 30 people on the call who represented different entities, everything from emergency medical services to TMDs to commission representatives to SNFs, skippers, care executives, the whole continuum of care, actually, from the moment of injury to the recovery process. The one thing that everybody discuss what they do, where they come from, what their interests are. Clearly, the injured patient was a common interest, but the one other commonality was the lack of absolute working connectivity, right? Everybody, I hate the word silos, particularly overused, but it really is like everybody does a great job working in their confined space. And the idea of connectivity would be, certainly one of the advantages of sort of pooling resources, and then also, if nothing else, just creating a portal for information, which is more significant.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is there a way we could sort of share email or, get information, exchange information that way digitally, at least know what activities you're working on versus us, so we're not being so redundant or sharing information, and particularly upcoming meetings, things like the abstract when they're due, just.
I think that's a great idea, and it sort of ties on with what Dr. Ratcher was saying. I think there's a golden opportunity here for, you mentioned the research piece of it, and we have now with Alexa, taking over the reins, or will eventually take over the reins with Dr. Todd and all the metrics and the data that we have. with, COT really being sort of, the American College of Surgeons, sort of academic driver, if you will. There's really a place there to really generate some great research. And certainly all of us are very clinical. Some of us have to be more academic than others, depending on what your job title is or what your role is, but I'll have some skin in the game on that. So the COT has a lot of talent on the sidelines, really not maybe on the sidelines, but where they're connected to all the different residency programs and centers. And those folks, they need to have a place that they can play, they can learn, they can publish. Dr. Dunn from Savannah, as trauma medical director, also wears the hat of the chair of our trauma systems development committee. I call it the data committee. We call it different things over the years, but basically that's sort of the research engine or committee for the commission. And be quite frankly, there's so much going on now, it's getting hard for him to oversee everything because there's so much work going on. So there's a lot of work that can be done, that can be tied with COT, who has people that can bring it off the bench and be responsible for everybody. We need a faculty member, we need a fellow, we need a resident that needs a project. We have a project, we need help. I can see that really marrying people up to where we can really get our work done. And that really ties into our commission of the Georgia Research Institute for Trauma, GRIT. If you'll notice when we publish a paper, everybody in this room is on that paper. It says, and on behalf of GRIT, you all remembers that. So for every level 1, 2, 3, and 4 trauma center, the trauma medical director and the trauma program manager are a member of that. So every paper that we publish, it says GRIT. That goes on your CV, it goes to your institution, it gives it credit. So your institution, the TMD and the trauma program manager all get credit for that because we are all working together, all submitting data. So that incredible infrastructure is there. We need some more workers, if you will, that could really marry up COT, our commission committee led by Dr. Dunn. So I think there's great opportunity here. I think this is a great discussion. We don't really know how to do it yet, but we need to do something.
Yeah, Alexis just kind of brought up a good point, and maybe we need to step back and ask the question: does everybody in the room a member of the COT? Has everybody signed up for COT? Do we, I mean, maybe that's step one. I mean, and kind of jumping off of that is that's the way we share information. There's work product that's coming out of the regional and national COT meeting that falls on the shoulders of, and I think you hit on this point too, Dennis, falls on Andy's shoulders to get done. We're the people that need to help get that done. And so, first of all, share an email list of this group with Dr. Christie, and making sure we got visibility of what's going on, because you may be working on something that hits on a big interest that somebody in the room may have some help we can provide with that. We don't know unless we have that visibility. So I guess first question is, how many people know for sure they're on the state COT? Right. It is a PVP requirement because as we said, that was why the TMD committee kind of maybe evolved out of a working committee, because it was considered, you join COT and that fits your requirement, but it really hasn't been very functional, I think, is one of the issues. Is that fair to say? Checks the box, and the reason we want the box checked is so we can actually get something out of it, right? So I think that's where we are. And what maybe the first thing we need to work on is just, first of all, visibility. A lot of things going on in the room, a lot of interest, a lot of power, a lot of capability that we can, kind of jump in on some of the things that the state COT needs to accomplish.
I'm just saying, this is our conduit for the commission, for the state of Georgia, from the providers. The COT is our conduit to national recognition. And what I mean by that is Dr. Christie at the Region 4 meeting, both in the spring and in the fall, at the National COT, gave a report on what Georgia's doing. Each state chair gives a report. And so all the work that we're doing here is reported for the state of Georgia to the COT region chief, who then reports it to the National Executive Committee. And so actually, you wouldn't think about it, but they know about what's going on at this meeting at the national level, and they know about all of our accomplishments. And that's where Georgia has been recognized nationally at the American College of Surgeons, COT, because through that reporting structure. So that I traveled the country and talked to various folks. Georgia's well recognized for their commitment to trauma excellence, and what we're doing here, and other states are actually trying to replicate what we're doing. So that's not something the commission has to do or spend money to do or get the word out. It's being transmitted through COT to the national level. That's good for us because it gives us recognition. And plus, we call over states and say we need an idea, we need to go, oh yeah, I know what you're doing in Georgia. By the way, can I ask you a question? So it's been a good relationship.
So there are a lot of questions that, I think collectively everyone, may have serious and happy to receive those, but, immediate thoughts would be at some point, potentially a small group of, interested representatives just kind of lay out and step 1, 2, 3s, barriers, sort of swab outs, and see what comes of it. Be happy to be part of it.
Yeah, awesome. Good discussion. Thanks, Dr. Christie, for giving us that update. So I think maybe one of the work products that can come out of this conversation is, first of all, just Dr. Christie and I can just share lists and make sure that everybody that's on my list is on his list, vice versa. So we can work on a little bit more cross-talk visibility. Any other questions, comments on the COT topic? All right, awesome. So we'll kind of hit down on a little bit further down on the agenda. I know we had a really robust conversation last quarter about all of our individual challenges with ophthalmology coverage. And one of the things that came out of that conversation that hit home for me was, obviously we'd love for all of us to have 24/7, 365 ophthalmology coverage, even if it's just for an exam to make sure that we're not missing something. But one of the bigger challenges is the all too frequent transfer to discharge. For instance, your center, you may have a potential eye injury that needs an expert exam. So you make arrangements for that person to be transferred out. They get transferred. They don't have any other injuries that would require admission. They get an exam at the place that might be a 2-hour drive away from them and their family, and they get discharged from the emergency department and have no way home. So that receiving facility then has to handle that patient, admit the patient, give them somewhere to sleep overnight until their family could get 2 hours away to pick them up. I mean, there's all kind of things. And it ties up our transport. So there's all kind of disadvantages to that situation. So maybe one of the thoughts I had was to try to tackle that portion of the problem. I don't think we can magically wave a wand and create ophthalmologists that will take call for all of us. I think that's not possible or realistic. But maybe we can figure out a way to do this. So I did a little research with the Georgia Society of Ophthalmology. First of all, I didn't know what the name of that society was until I looked it up. It's the GSO. And it turns out one of our ophthalmologists that covers part-time call in Gainesville is their president-elect for this year. So I reached out to Dr. Ballast and just started a conversation about how maybe our organizations can team up. So many times we're maybe on opposite sides of the table with our ophthalmologists trying to convince them to help us. There's all kinds of barriers to that, but just that part aside, I just want to push that aside from the conversation and just start talking about how we can maybe face that challenge of transfer and discharge, issue. I just heard yesterday that, he's, put together a presentation on ophthalmologic emergencies to maybe, help us figure out as trauma surgeons, who know that there are eyes, and we have two of them most of the time, and they help us see, but that's about all maybe I know about ophthalmology. But help us really be better at determining who really needs emergent ophthalmologic care, to maybe tackle that first, big problem. And so I just heard yesterday that he's scheduled to give us that presentation locally, for the attendings and residents and APPs on our team, and that's scheduled for April. So my plan is to kind of screen that presentation, make sure it's what we need, what we have in mind, and maybe invite him for our next at our next commission and TMD meeting to maybe give that here. And ultimately, I would love to have that become part of their organization's contribution to help us, and help them too. I mean, it's on their radar as well. So, questions, comments, additions to that, ideas, in terms of how we might expedite that process are certainly welcome. Alicia?
Sorry, I think I was the person that had the comment. Not even just with ophthalmology, we've been talking a while about some sort of central command transfer center, or like with the level 3-4 group, we've been talking about how can we put together a resource map. But what I see is happening, at least just at my facility, and I imagine it's happening at a lot of other facilities, is the rate of turnover in our ER providers. It's impossible to re-educate every time we get a new ER doctor or mid-level on here's how we appropriately screen who needs to be transferred, here's how you go about transfer. And I know that this is not a problem we're gonna solve in one meeting, and I think it's too big of a challenge to try to create, at least right now, a central command hotline, and then you call, no matter where you are, you call, and then they're the ones that figure out who's the hospital closest to you with the resource you need, with a bed available. And so, at least from my perspective, we're not the ones having to make all those phone calls and try to take care of that patient and the 15 others in our ER. But what may be more realistic is having a dashboard that is updated. So is there a way, and Gina, this may be more for you or Liz, but is there a way that if we submitted our call schedules and it was actively updated to know, and you could just go to the GQuit or the Trauma Commission website and look up, hey, here's who's on call at this facility closest to me that has this resource. And it would really cut down on, it would just make the transfer process a lot more effective. Especially with specialties where you may have two hospitals that have ophthalmology trauma coverage in the whole state of Georgia on that one night. So do we think that is more realistic? Something, and we can talk about this later in a different meeting or between meetings, but if we all submitted our call schedules and created some kind of daily updated dashboard, somewhere that we know we can go to cut down on time it takes to figure that out.
I think that would be useful, but there probably needs to be a pre-screening, some kind of teleophthalmology, so that before you initiate, to your point, a 2-hour transfer, tie up EMS, like does the patient actually need to go?
Right, I mean, yeah, so you would call so if I went to this dashboard and said, hey, so-and-so's on call at whatever hospital, and then you call them and you have your phone discussion, and then they either accept or say no, they can come to my office next week or something like that. But sometimes, honestly, just figuring out where there is an ophthalmologist on call can take a long time.
Well, one of the things that I want to eventually address with the GSO organization is is there a way for the state to regionalize something like you're talking about, like Mac mentioned last quarter about how they handle their ophthalmology problem? To make, that tele-exam or that teleconsult, available for, not just those of us who are lucky enough to been able to arrange that for our local, situation, but for all of us around the state. Cause I think having access to that for all of us would save a lot. I mean, first of all, blowing ourselves up on our own knowledge, is maybe step one, but step two is on those cases where maybe we aren't sure. Maybe where the ER doc isn't quite sure about whether I should be worried about this person's eye or not. Have access to someone from a statewide perspective that might be able to help us through that. So I don't know if Mac, if you have any comments about kind of how that works for your place.
Well, we struggle like everyone because we have some very talented ophthalmologists. They just don't take call. Well, they're on the call schedule, but they don't come to call. So, we were in this transfer mode all the time. Every time we call our ENT colleagues, they said, oh, they have to immediately have an eye exam or they've got to be transferred. It was just killing us. And so our CMO actually kind of worked this out. He's a former EMR physician. And so we, contracted with a group, a large group out of Atlanta, and they trained our APPs, and we got the equipment, and it's worked out really well. And we generally don't, if it's an obvious lobe injury, wherever, they still transfer out, but we've been able to keep just about all of our, serious orbital fracture type, the concerning patients that didn't have entrapment. And it's probably 2 a month. It's not very much. And APPs have developed a really good relationship. They get on the phone with them. So they, share the exam with them online, and it's working out great. I don't know the cost, and that's probably the big thing for everybody in the room is how much is this service, and do they? I don't know if they charge by the, each consult, or they get some monthly stipend. They don't share that with me, and that's probably what I need to find out and share with y'all. So.
Yeah, that's really helpful. There are still going to be people that, if you don't have full coverage, there are still going to be people that need to be transferred. Hopefully we can will that down because it really needed. I'll let that be the goal.
I will say real quick, Vanderbilt has a really good facial trauma PMG that sort of breaks down who really needs, who's concerning for eye. It breaks it down by different facial bone fractures. And then they talk about what they call red flag symptoms and those that need immediate consult. And it's a really pretty good PMG. I shared it with the guy that used it for our verification, our consultation, and he loved it. He's using it up at Riverside in Columbus, Ohio. He stole it from us, but I stole it from Vanderbilt. But I showed it to our ENT colleagues.
Can I steal it from you?
Yeah, I just looked it up. You can still pull it up. Just put in Vanderbilt's trauma PMG and it comes up. But I showed it to our ENT colleagues and I said, hey, can we use this? And they're like, absolutely not. They didn't, they want everybody getting an eye exam. And again, I think they use it as a reason to not have to fool with the patient fraction, to be honest with you. But it is a good PMG. Take a look at it.
Well, we've had that similar problem, that everybody has an orbital fracture, whether it's displaced or not, whether they have a clinical sign of entrapment or not, it's kind of serving an agenda in my mind for them because they want to push our administration to just pay somebody enough to cover call all the time. That's always the answer, just get unlimited resources. We will fix every problem. We can just find those unlimited resources we can find, but obviously that's not realistic.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can learn lessons from other types of injuries, like, for example, when you're skull fractures in children. For the PEDS world, we get a lot of those transfers and they don't that's another, I mean, that could be another, probably a couple of these across our state that we could, but, and I know that there is, you know, in Utah, we cover 4 states, for example, and they use a lot of telehealth to discharge those, you know, winter skull fractures with GCS of 15 home, so they don't have to travel hours to the pediatric trauma surgeon to say home. And then I'm wondering with burns, do you guys have anything that is relevant? Like, do you do teleconsults? Because not everyone can.
We're actually creating a monkey that we hired a guy that's semi-retired. And we push a lot of our stuff to the morning, but obviously if there's a facial fracture, we have lots of guys that will handle a lot of that stuff. But we do have MCP that's still down the street. But
Do you guys do anything for burns across the state? Or are you, like, if somebody's burned in South Georgia, is there a system set up that?
well, we have a burn app that will try to triage patients, you know, that we look for pictures. A lot of providers will call an assistant being transferred, we'll tell them this patient can follow up, and that kind of does that. But there is our facility has a burn app that takes pictures and then we call them and it cuts down a lot of the transfers that we need. That's basically the only telehealth for us that we provide.
Be an app.
Well, I think, you know, the ABA transfer guidelines are like the model. You know, we could talk about how effective and how, let's say, over or under triage or whatever. But that idea established for, I look at maybe at least the Vanderbilt PFD that you mentioned, Mac, is kind of that type of solution. You know, it's just to help us figure out who needs to go and who doesn't.
Yeah, it breaks down what imaging they need, and again, it talks about these red flag symptoms, and it tells you what those symptoms are, which is, you know, most of what you already know, but.
All right, who wants to take that guideline and make an app out of it? Anybody takers?
My program manager said the ophthalmology coverage is 24-hour, it's a daily rate, so, but I'm trying to get the number, but I don't think she knows it either, so.
Gotcha.
It's not per consult, it's actually, they do a 24-hour coverage every day. That could be pricey.
Yeah.
Yeah, but not if every center here chipped in a little bit.
That's true. We pulled for our own ophthalmologist, we pulled the numbers for 2 years. How many times did they get called about an ocular injury of significance? And, you know, we're a low volume center. And so it turned out, I think over 2 years, it was 15 cases. So how many times, you know, one every few months,
It doesn't want to think about how much it is per day. How much it is per day for your coverage and how much you're paying per patient then. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just think, you know, in our situation, I don't know if you guys have heard the same thing from your ophthalmologist that you're either partially covering or trying to get to cover. Or it's not the things that they're really needed for that keep them from wanting to take call. It's the things that they aren't really needed for that they get called about that keep them up at night, answering phone calls about pink eye and you know, little things that we probably should be able to take care of as a you know, in-house service, so, you know, whether it's ER, whether it's trauma or whatever. That's what I hear from our guys is that it's just not worth it to be up all night answering things that I don't need to answer for the 15 cases in a year that you might really need me for. They don't mind coming in when they're really needed. It's just that the other stuff keeps them from, that's the pesky stuff that keeps them from wanting to take off.
Ours just don't come in. And we had to do it or we wouldn't get verified. I mean, we had to have coverage, and so the hospital, you know, prior to our verification, made sure we had something.
It's amazing, but that becomes like your readiness cost, which is crazy. No, it's unnecessary.
So Matt, did you do your, I'm impressed with your APP system and your training and how you've got it going with the teleophthalmology. But that doesn't stand alone by itself, does it? Don't you all have, then do you have to pay an ophthalmologist to be available too? How does, I'm a little confused on the two.
So we have ophthalmology on the call schedule, but in reality, they won't come in for that. Everybody says transfer. They'll see them the next day in the office. And so that's our other standby. You know, if they're not intubated with, 20 chest tubes, then we have to put them on a stretcher, take them away. And that's what we do if they're pretty stable, is we just take them over the next day and they'll work them in and they'll see them. But on these ones where they've got, multi-system injuries that are pretty unstable, we've got to either decide to transfer them or keep them. And so we wanted to keep them. So that's why. And some you just can't get an exam on, with the terrible facial swelling, and you just can't get an exam until the swelling goes down.
So you're really doing both, and
we're doing both.
You're paying for ophthalmology coverage and you're paying for your APPs, and you're working it out.
Yeah, but to meet the requirements,
Would they come in your office, if your APP says this globe is examined, it's ruptured, would they come in and fix that, or would they want you to transfer?
They'll transfer.
So have you ever run into questions by the ACS saying, it looks like you have 24/7 ophthalmology coverage, but I see your transfers out for ophthalmology are.
I'm just thinking, that's why we did it, so we didn't have the transfers to keep that number super low. So that they didn't call us out. They asked us if we had coverage, we said yes, and that's as far as it went.
Yeah, I think how far your reviewers delve into that process is, maybe visit. But any national traffic, Dr. Christie, CFT perspective, anything going on with?
I know the region, not an uncommon problem in the region. I'm not, I know Kentucky and I know that, certainly Mississippi, South Carolina are states that are trying to come up with a solution similarly, but there's no uniform way again. It seems to be successful so far.
That was the national TQIP in November, and it's a national problem. I mean, they brought it up that everybody's having this struggle, everybody.
Well, I think that you're right. I mean, I think TQIP last year doubled down on the 24/7 hard requirement. This year they I won't say backtracked a little bit, but the line wasn't nearly as hard. It was soft. That's a good word.
Well, it's the same with neurosurgery. I mean, I was told by our consultants, essentially, the reason the grade book says document within 30 minutes rather than at the bedside in 30 minutes is because if they pushed them too hard, they all resign from their training privileges and you don't have coverage anymore. And so they soften that for neurosurgery, and they're going to probably have to soften it for ophthalmology, or we're all going to not pass.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge from a BRC perspective is how hard you push. Jim, I see you nodding there.
No, I'm just nodding because I agree with you. This is a national problem, not just ophthalmology, but neurosurgery, hand, vascular, IR, it's a problem in this country. And I think, regionalization makes a lot of sense for sure. But, we can't get our plastic surgeon to get on a phone and talk to a critical access hospital about a facial fracture because they consider themselves on call for our hospital, not on call for South Georgia, right? And so the only way for them to get seen is to get that transferred in, which is, it's a transfer discharge, right? So there's a lot of challenges, and this is a national problem. I think there are potential areas of creative solutions we can do, but then you get into hematology as well. The critical access hospital, all I have to say is I feel uncomfortable with this, and I don't feel comfortable discharging the patient. So now the only option is to transfer, right? Sure. And I mean, you can educate, like Alicia said, you can educate these people, but in 2 weeks, there's going to be a whole other cadre of VR physicians at that critical access hospital that, because they rotate so often, and they're, and then the PAs and nurse practitioners that are now covered our critical access hospitals. So, I mean, it's a challenge. I don't really have any good answers. Well, and I don't want to be a naysayer, but I think at this point, we're gonna have to start thinking outside the box and getting buy-in from our subspecialists to be willing to answer a phone call. You know, to help triage things, because it's a patient issue. They travel 3 hours. You know, it's a hospital issue. It's a throughput issue. It's an ER overcrowding issue. I mean, you can go on and on and on. I mean, we all know what the issues are, just everywhere, right? But I think both at a state level, which is what we can control, and then on the national level from a VRC and a COT level, they need to maybe readdress this, because I just heard a very unnerving statistic that upwards of 30% of all ACS site visits for level 1 and level 2 verifications fail because of lack of coverage for a subspecialty. I mean, that's a huge number. That's a third of all traumas. Really? That's crazy. So, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that same statistic in November at TQIP, and it was maybe a little nervous, especially having a review coming up. So one of the thoughts I had when Alexis was commenting was, you know, all the similar situations. So it just hit me, how many of the level 3 centers without neurosurgery and level 4 centers are employing brain injury guideline triage to maybe avoid transfer? That's another model that we could maybe shoot towards from an ophthalmology coverage standpoint if we really want to make sure we're only transferring those people that have the red flags. That may be an opportunity that we can model after. So I just was curious about how many of you guys in the room are keeping the big ones if you don't have a neurosurgeon. Anybody?
Look at it. We haven't started yet, but we're starting to think about a discussion and developing a guideline, so we're gonna move through that.
So we're obviously using it, but none of our referring facilities are, to Jim's point, are comfortable. And, you know, obviously we're not going to turn down a transfer if somebody says, help me. Even if I don't really think they need help, they think they need help. And if they think they need help, thus the patient needs help. So it puts you in a tough situation, like you said. But, you know, this is one of those things where maybe there is data out there that help our referring centers feel comfortable. So tell me how that works in your spot.
We are level 4, Griffin, Georgia, basically. So basically, when we have a head bleed, like we apply the big criteria, we have to talk to neurosurgery. So we talk to Keystone or North Fulton. Usually we report to North Fulton, and basically we discuss the case, the trauma call, so the neurosurgeon, and usually actually they will tell us watch it on the facility. Sometimes they just 6 hour repeat CT. Some of them actually go home. Some of them will stay for 24 hours, like GCS is then back to normal, but most of them actually we keep them on the facility.
Anybody else have a comment about brain injury guidelines specifically? I know in our place we have one of our larger sister hospitals in the system has an emergency observation unit, just like we have, and that's where we put our big ones is in the EOU for that, you know, delayed exam. And we've established tele exam that the trauma surgeon will call it at Gainesville will get on and do an initial exam and do a follow-up exam and avoid transfer across town. But we haven't necessarily expanded that to our other sister hospitals and certainly not to our other referring centers in Northeast Georgia. But again, it's taken a lot of national data even to get to that point for our system at least. So I encourage that some of the other places around the state are really looking at that as well. But, you know, that may be a good model that we could kind of shoot for as far as ophthalmology goes. And so I think we beat that dead horse a little bit. Hopefully we'll maybe bring it back to life at some point.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So
how does the college view the over reliance on, for coverage for locums? Is there a big problem in it at all? Does it matter?
No, I don't think it matters. I think, as long as your quality metrics, are, are intact and it's not causing a quality problem, whether it's contracted or not, I don't think it really matters.
We have something that feels differently about that, so it's right.
I think I know who your consultant is. We had that same consultant. And it's a good, it definitely, you know, you want your consultants to be tougher on you than the college, right? But I think as long as you're monitoring quality and not having any issues, you know, maybe it puts a little more microscope on your PIPS program, because they want to make sure of it, but as long as it's intact, I think you're in good shape.
Hey, John Paul Hillman of Dublin. We're a level 3 facility. And a lot of what we've been talking about is these unnecessary transfers, which ties up the EMS system and makes our wait times longer. And at our hospital, in our review, everybody gets transferred out. And when they get discharged from emergency room, it just makes me cringe. I can't stand it. And it's mainly minor traumatic brain injuries, facial fractures, jaw fracture, ENT type things, and pediatrics. And and everybody in the room talking about, oh, I use this guideline, borrowed from Vanderbilt or borrowed from Emory. If the state or our group had some sort of standardized guidelines on just these commonly transferred, often discharged, to start with that. Or I'm a little bit intimidated in our center to come up with my own set of guidelines. But where do I go far? Do I go to Vanderbilt or UNC or Duke or Florida? So if we had a state-approved Georgia Committee on Trauma, these are the guidelines for eye injuries, and I go through this exam, I document that, I'm going to feel way more comfortable keeping it in my place rather than somebody lawyer coming to me, where'd you get those guidelines? I got them from Indiana. Why'd you choose Indiana? Well, I ran into a guy at a meeting and he used it and they liked it. But if there was a Georgia Committee on Trauma stamp of approval, I think we could cut down more than half of our transfers out, probably more than that. So I don't know who would do that. I don't have the time to do that.
Well, I would say using the East or Western Trauma Association guidelines, which are, national trauma organizations, you would have, I think legally would be very defensible because they're reviewed on a periodic basis. They're updated. They're published in the Green Journal. And so if you go to those two websites, I know those are for sure, those aren't institutional. Those are major trauma organization guidelines. So I think you'd be safe. But again, you have to take from your community because some of them have things that you're not capable of doing, like Rebola and pelvic fractures, and you may not have the capability. You have to take from the to your.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I mean, we can certainly improve. We got the people in the room that could definitely improve a guideline, but it's exactly that. It's going to be different for every community in every region in terms of how much of a blanket you can throw over that situation, because it may not be completely pertinent to your center.
I would just agree with what Dr. Paul said about the specific guidelines with facial fractures. I don't know what you're talking about, Mac, is the East and the West. Those are great resources we should all use and look at because they are national regional guidelines. I don't know if they have one specifically to what you're talking about. There maybe I hadn't looked at that in a while. If it is, we can use it. If not, I think this group could develop a few things in conjunction with our maxillofacial surgeons and say, does this sound reasonable? And maybe that's something Alexa could help with, because now we could do that. See, the beauty of the process is we have arbormetrics, we have all the data flowing in, we have shots that can analyze the data. So to answer your legal question, we can come up with a guideline, we can implement, we can track the data, and then we can say, this works. We haven't had anybody lose an eye or whatever in the last year. We saw 2,000 patients as a system. And then when the attorney comes in, you can say, read my own record, here it is, this is how Georgia does it. So these are great ideas. I mean, I think this could work.
And I think with the lack of tort reform in the city, that we have
In the state using, biomarkers to sort of influence the triage pathway for traumatic brain injury. Is anyone using that?
No.
No.
We're just curious if anyone in the state is using biomarkers or adults to kind of help triage the patients with traumatic brain injury. So coming down the line, you know, obviously there's serologic assessment of anything. I mean, you can have neuronal or glial cell injury, and the glial cell biomarkers, there now is an ISAT for those. And one of the things we're trying to do is validate how those can be helpful for prediction of injury, not only severity, but whether or not patients need to be transferred. The question we're going to have, whether it's if we have APPs doing an ophthalmology exam, or we have the in place like an algorithm that relies on these biomarkers and imaging, I think the big thing we have to understand is that we have to collectively identify what we're cool with as a negative predictive value. Can that be 5%? Can it be 10%? Like, what error rate are we going to tolerate? Because it's never going to be 100% bulletproof. And so I think that's the hiccups when we try to initiate a pathway of keeping ophthalmologic injuries locally or traumatic brain injury locally. Somehow we have to support these institutions with saying a failure rate of 2%, 10%, or whatever is okay. Otherwise, we're not going to get compliance. How do we know what that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a million dollar question. I think it's like, you know, to me, it's even the level 1 and 2 centers that don't have ophthalmology coverage like Tuesday night, it's how much information do we have at our disposal so that we feel comfortable not transferring that patient, even if we don't have an eye expert available to see that patient in our facility. Similar to how, you know, how much information does it take for a level 4 center to feel comfortable keeping a big one? And, you know, we're lucky enough that there's lots of data out there for brain injury guidelines. There's not a lot of data out there for what the acceptable failure rate for this corneal abrasion or what, you know, what, I mean, fill in the blank, for eye injury. So I think that's a great question, and I don't know if there's an answer to it.
For these people in the room, what's the failure rate for the skull fracture with no CT evidence of brain injury in a GCS 15 child? What's the failure rate of decompensation in that child? 0, isn't it? Right.
Linear skull fracture, non-displaced, going back to the blood.
I think there are some injuries that we're talking about that have a 0 failure rate.
Yep.
You know, like a maxillary sinus infection. That doesn't need to be seen in the middle of the night. Certainly doesn't need to be transferred 2 hours away. Orbital wall fractures may be a little bit different, but I think there are some issues, you know, even the, you know, 1 pixel of blood that may or may not be there on a CT scan is something that's GCS 15. I don't know if that needs to be transferred. I don't know what the area rate or the failure rate on that is. But I think some centers feel very comfortable about discharging those people. Certainly within 6 hours after a repeat head CT. But you know, trying to get our level 4 centers or even our level 4 centers or critical access hospitals to be comfortable with that. That's really the issue. But I think you're right. It comes down to what failure rate are we going to be acceptable with.
Right, the orbital contract, so to speak, with the orbital fracture. Yeah, the ophthalmologist would say that, you know, if there is the pupils react to the light, and they will, if even they have a brain injury, you do a forced abduction in all 4 directions. They're probably not contracted, they probably don't need to be transferred. Are we comfortable pulling that out of the mouth? So we want to grab a pair of forceps and roll the eye around, you know, to be sure that it's not entrapped, like how it has to be sort of something that we can broadly apply.
Well, I think that's what I want to get at with kind of cooperation with the GSO. I mean, to establish exactly what it is that we need to worry about, and what can we not worry about. Because I think we're oftentimes in the same situation as our critical access hospitals in situations like that, where I'm not sure I know what I'm worried about, but I'm worried. I'm worried that I'm missing something. I'm worried, but so, I mean, maybe, I don't think there's a paper or a national guideline out there that I'm aware of that helps us in that situation, specifically for eye injuries. But if we can work to establish that for the experts, you know, I think it serves both purposes. They don't want to be taking a 24/7 call and getting calls about stuff they don't need to know about when they're staying up all night. That's one of the reasons there's a shortage, right? So I think our goals aren't aligned, but they're at least pointed in the same direction. So maybe we can take advantage of that. So, that being said, this is not a useful discussion, but I think we need to move on. As we said yesterday, I think we want to move on with approving this, final version of at least the content for the adult transfer guideline. And get that moving, and we'll talk about where we are with the pediatrics. And this is where I think maybe collaboration with our GCTE colleagues may be useful. But there was just a minor wording suggestion that we add nearest level 1 or 2 trauma center to the emergency triage, emergency transfer portion. But take a look at this. If there are no other changes we suggest, I would entertain a motion of what we do with this to move forward. So just maybe a little bit of clarity, I wanted to take what we had done before and break it into basically two populations. So I think we've sent a mixed message to our critical access hospitals in the past. There's a patient comes in and you need to send them out. But there's a group of patients that still need to be transferred that aren't unstable, that maybe need to be examined first with maybe some imaging. And so I wanted to hit the emergency transfer. You see this patient, you get on the phone immediately, population. From that population that you still need to transfer efficiently, but maybe not emergently. So that's kind of the reason for the 2 paragraphs there.
We should imaging them before we transfer.
Well, certainly if they don't hit any of the first ones, we definitely don't want to encourage folks to feel like they have to image everything before they decide to transfer. But if you don't meet any of those other criteria, you got to find an injury or a reason to transfer before they transfer. And so that's at least my thought process behind that.
I just have a question. So a lot of those injuries that are listed on the top prior to CT imaging, a lot of those things are actually able to be managed at level 3s. Maybe not the mangled extremity, but certainly we do manage a lot of those at level 3 centers. So could we expand that maybe to include, or I don't know about the level 4s, but just from our end, we already manage a lot of that at our level 3.
Go ahead, we can comment on where you mentioned high grade spleen or liver. Do we need to combine that better for our referring conditions or?
That's a good question. That's the kind of conversation I want to have. I didn't really put a number on that because I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I have a hard time getting our radiologist at a level 1 center to grade the splenic.
Well, that was my point. We do now. We had to struggle and do a lot of education on that. So everybody has availability to AAST guidelines.
So I mean, I think the reason I didn't put a number there is simply that I just wanted to make sure that
at their discretion, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be too overly technical about this, but at the same time, want to be just technical enough.
What were this supposed to present to? Just non-negative critical access hospitals or all of them?
I would say critical access, and I would say level 4s. Level 4s kind of, at least the being a level 4 center employed, maybe not this exact set of triage criteria, but at least a set of triage criteria, and they thought about it. So at the very least, the non-designated centers, if not those plus level fours.
Yes.
I obviously missed the previous meeting, in my experience, I think we get, more phone calls, maybe than we need to for people that feel uncomfortable, for even the minor injuries. I can't imagine any critical access hospital that's keeping somebody with a systolic blood pressure of 90 or sending them home with a systolic blood pressure of 90. What are we trying to accomplish here, I guess, is my question. Are we having problems with critical access hospitals not identifying critical injuries and transferring them? Because from a level 1 center, I'm seeing just the opposite. I'm seeing over transfer, not under transfer.
Well, that's a good point, but I think that the idea is to identify those people within a few minutes that need a emergent transfer. So certainly this doesn't encompass everybody that gets transferred because we're going to have those issues. But I don't think having a set of emergency transfer criteria exacerbates those issues. I mean, I think the problem that we want to avoid is somebody in that first category sitting around for an hour or two at a facility that can't handle their injury. So to me, the idea here is the urgency of transferring those urgent patients.
Yeah, I would just say that, we can all tell those stories, you get somebody with a gunshot wound or whatever, hypotensive, and some people are getting CAT scans. It really don't matter. You don't have a surgeon, maybe you don't even have blood in the hospital, or you've got 1 or 2 units, no platelets. They're shot somewhere, they're hypotensive. You don't need to scan them. You just need to get an IV going, get what you have, and get them out of there. And so I think what you're trying to do is say it's okay to do that because over the history of Georgia, we beat on people and not been good stewards at the trauma centers and saying, well, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? So I think if you remember, several years ago, I guess maybe 10 years ago now, when the commission said we need to change history, we basically sent out a poster similar to this, and a letter that we all signed, either as trauma medical directors, actually, we all signed and said, hey, it's okay to transfer now without getting imaging. We're not going to be mean anymore. We were wrong. We basically said that in a nice way. And so I think this is like empowering them, that reminding, this is the 10-year reminder, we're not going to be mean anymore. It's okay to send these patients. And sometimes the docs on the phone will sort of pause and say, well, I can't get it. Look, they're comatose with a gunshot wound to the head. They need to be with me. Send them over here. Don't take any more x-rays. Don't do any more paperwork. And I just tell them it's okay. They're like, wow, that's great. So I think that's what you're trying to do, and not be perfect, but just say, if they need us, you can send us. We won't yell at you. Just to be plain about it.
Yeah, I just think that, the whole reason behind redoing this and revisiting it is just to reemphasize that message. We're here, and we're not going to yell at you if you have somebody in that first set of categories. And a lot of these, to be honest, were just, were taken from that list. And the only really big change I made was breaking it down into those two populations because, they're two different messages, right? It allows for those patients that are stable to be handled if you have the facilities to handle their injury. Maybe you, after your workup, they've got an isolated ankle fracture or whatever. You're perfectly okay with keeping that. But we don't want to give critical access hospitals the idea that we'll just take anybody that has a positive finding on any workup if you feel comfortable taking care of that patient. But we do want to feel comfortable calling us immediately with those people that set off those big red flags. So that's the idea.
Just not to complicate things. With a level 1 or 2, I mean, just to think.
Yeah, we need to get back to that question.
To the level 3, that's the very capable level 3s, or I'm diving back into my adult world. But I would imagine a lot of you guys are able to take care of a lot of these injuries on that list. I don't know if one thing we could do is to your local, or maybe just verbiage, to your appropriate level trauma center, with a QR code with nearby resources. That gets a little more complicated, but I'm just kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's a good point. I mean, I think we can allow for that if you're in a certain situation, but, honestly, if that patient arrives near a capable level 3, you're certainly going to keep them. But are you the best transfer destination for that patient, that's in a critical access hospital? And that's, I'm biased with that answer, but again, if you have a choice on where that patient goes next, and I would argue that a level 1 or 2 should be the appropriate destination, even if you would take care of that patient if it was in your center to start with. I don't know. That's obviously an opinion, not a fact.
I just have one question about the second set of that is, sorry, I just want to make sure that we're not encouraging people to scan everybody before transferring.
Well, I think that's the reason to have the whole first set of things. You wouldn't, if you identify the anything in that first set, you wouldn't, you transfer prior to CT imaging. But if you have a stable patient, I think, I wouldn't want to encourage any transferring center to transfer somebody just because of a mechanism before they know what's wrong with the patient. The first set of criteria is designed to pick up really quickly things that we would be immediately concerned about.
We get a lot of those transfers of people that come in with a mechanism that clearly could, like, it wouldn't fall into that top category, but it's not helpful to us to have imaging. Like sometimes the imaging can't transfer because, we don't get that imaging, so we have to repeat the imaging, or they come late, or they don't have the capability with blood, or whatever. And so I worry about the sort of creating too much from the ETLS.
I share those concerns in terms of over imaging, but again, I think to me that's a separate problem. That's a separate issue of that maybe should warrant a conversation on the transfer line of hey, okay, we'll be happy to feel free to call us early if you have a question about whether you should image further. But the overarching concept is to transfer that patient as soon as you find an injury you can't take care of, or you have a concern for an injury you can't take care of it. And again, that first set of criteria is designed to quickly triage. This is rural trauma team development concepts right here. I mean, if you want to kind of run back to that, this is exactly what that is. Look at the patient. If you see those red flags, first paragraph, get the patient out quickly. If you don't see those red flags, it's okay that you convince the patient until you find an injury, but maybe that's a caveat we can put at the bottom.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Are you suggesting maybe we should put something like, if the patient was stable initially and you find the presence of any of these radiographic findings, in other words, put something in between that says, if you get down to, they didn't have any of the top ones, and you get to the next one that says patient was initially stable, and you find the presence of any of the following radiographic findings, then transfer. I don't know.
You're saying like,
Also
there's
consider, you get a patient and you know it's gonna take you 3 hours to get them transferred. You might as well scan them in the meantime, so you've got some idea of what you're fighting against while they're still with you.
Well, I think that's the problem that Liz is getting at is sometimes, and I tell folks in our ATLS classes all the time that are going to be taking a call at a critical access hospital or level 4 center in the ED, it's not just delaying transfer. that you're worried about when you image somebody fully. So you can make the argument, like you just said, and it makes sense that, well, I mean, I can't get EMS, I might as well scan. But that actually throws in an extra potential delay when they get to the center for the reasons that Liz is getting at. Maybe the films didn't transfer and you have to repeat it. Maybe you have to expose that patient to double the radiation or another contrast load because you can't get the films to transfer. So there's all kinds of, you may, by scanning that patient that you know you're going to transfer, it's not going to change your management. I think to Liz's point, don't do it because even though it might not take EMS longer to get the patient there, the care of that patient might be delayed for other reasons that you don't anticipate. So I look at that as totally separate from the urgent transfer patient. I think that's a message that we send separately. I think if we try to put our brains in the brains of those the people that have those limited resources that are calling me about these transfers completely. We try to solve every problem with one poster. I think we're going to run into big problems because you can't. It's complex, right? So you can't boil all of that down. But the idea here, and I think the idea with the previous iteration of this was identify the urgent transfer need quickly and don't do anything else that delays transfer. And I hope, that was the idea. If that's not coming across when you look at that, then that's the whole reason I wanted to put it in front of everybody.
I just agree. I think there needs to be some way to address level 3s because a large part of my registry of these patients, I could not imagine trying to transfer them all to a level 2.
As a level 3, you don't have to. If you have the capabilities of taking care of that patient in your center, you wouldn't think about transferring. This is really for and we wouldn't send that out to the level 3s. But I would argue that if that patient's in a critical access hospital that has a choice of sending to a level 1 or a 2 or a level 3, they need to go to the higher level centers.
Whenever I read this, though, this implies to me that these patients should go to the level 1 or 2 center.
If you're transferring those patients, they do.
Misunderstanding it.
And if I'm not mistaken, most of the field triage criteria to initially deliver that patient, if you have access as an EMS provider to a level 1 or 2 center. Certainly, I agree with you completely that if that patient shows up in a level 3 center that has all the capabilities you have, this won't go to a level 3 center. This is designed for, as I think somebody mentioned earlier, designed for the critical access hospitals and maybe the level 4 centers.
And along the same one, does it, if you scroll down, does it have like a purpose statement on the top, like this is intended to be a guideline for rural or? I'm also at a level 3, and it also looks like if a patient saw this, my son was in a bad, it looked like he should have been in the level 1 instead of a AAA. It kind of puts a legal. I would make sure it's real clear that it says these guidelines are designed for non-trauma centers.
We're going to have to, I think, about that.
Yeah, I think we do. We do need to do that. So
Maybe the folder and critical access hospitals,
Maybe look over this and give us just if they are interpreting it, like what would the level 4s in here, how would they interpret this? What is from regional? I think some of this is really regional, just for someone that has taken call in South Georgia and then takes call in Atlanta and Gainesville. God, it's so different. It's just so different. And I hear your concerns. So I don't know if we.
yeah, so I think as far as to wrap things up quickly, and I feel like we're cutting the discussion a little bit short, but we kind of have to for time purposes. Please forward those concerns to me by email, and we'll kind of vet those out.
I'll give Dennis the last word on that.
Just not to belabor the point, but I think, I remember these discussions from 10 years ago. I think I remember that vaguely. And so I think I had to pull the poster from 10 years ago, but I think maybe the way that I worked around good. I think we might have said something about, to the appropriate level trauma center. And then that way you could, each region could choose what, if you had 3 next door that was, a 3 or a 3 in or whatever, one of those patients, you let the local region sort of decide where patients go or whatever. So I think that might have been a little bit of that, I'm not sure, but, so the points are well taken. Every region's different, every trauma center is different. But you could fall back to that point if that's what they want to do. What you're trying to do is just let the local non-trauma center decide. Remember, think about what we're trying to do. It's like, if they're in bad shape, don't waste a lot of time. That's the whole thing. We're not going to get every patient, identify every injury that needs to have something. What we really want to do is not have under triage. If they're in bad shape, recognize it within a minute and then make plans to get it out the door, even if it takes 3 hours or 2 hours, at least start the process. And then, so if you said something like transfer to, really transfer to the appropriate level trauma center and then let the region make their decision. I think that could work too. But anyway, please email Matt those kind of concerns so you can.
Yeah, great discussion. I appreciate the input, and maybe we can kind of work on this, maybe tweak this a little bit in the meantime, and send out a final form for hopefully everybody's approval. I think it's a good goal to get this out as quickly as we possibly can, but we definitely want to make sure it sends the right message. So, with that, I will just go ahead and adjourn. Our next meeting is May 15th, I think. I'd love to try to get this maybe before the commission meeting if possible. Yeah, so
Okay. Were you going to show that slide?
Was that I didn't get to PVPs, which I'll talk about during the meeting. But performance-based payments are evolving, and they're going to start as we kind of should be, is looking at our as outcomes and process measures. So what value are we adding? And that's, how we're evolving. I'll talk a little bit about it during the meeting. What we're going to focus on, DVT prophylaxis and early hip fixation spinning. So more on that to you today.
And there is a readiness cost survey that's going to be a level 1 and level 2 contract requirements for FY 2026. This readiness cost survey is going to be due on September, so we want everybody to be in the loop. A team effort, a very big lift for your finance teams. It's to try to get your readiness cost data for calendar year 2024, so we know how much it costs for you to be trauma ready. And Dr. Ash can give a brief overview of the history of it. We can do it in like 3 minutes.
I know we're running over here, so I'll be very fast and very brief, but this is incredibly important. And you as medical directors, you've got to be involved, please. This affects your paycheck. This affects your trauma center funding. This affects our ability to go to capital and show what trauma centers cost. So this is your time to raise your hand and be at the table, or you're going to be on the table for dinner. Okay, so if you just turn this over to your finance team, it will not work. Okay, the finance team thinks one way. We as trauma surgeons and trauma program managers think another way. We must work together on this. And the first surveys we had, there's going to be some webinars going on how to do it. Write down my number. My cell phone number is 478-960-2562. Call me anytime, day or night. I'll walk you through the survey. You can ask me all the little pithy questions, on how to fill out line 7 or how to fill out line 8. Because I want you to maximize your cost legally, fairly. This survey is designed, if you fill it out right, can't game the system. It's very tight. And we've done this several times now. So it's really, some of you may be new to as prominent directors, so it's not anything really new. Our last, survey came out, level 1s were 10 million, level 2s were 4.8 million. I think level 3s were 1.8. I think level 4s were about 81,000. So, Tennessee just presented at the Southeastern Surgical Congress this week, I think Monday. Tennessee did this survey, used our survey and tweaked it, and did it in Tennessee. The average cost, remember our survey, the last one for 1s and 2s was 2016, I think, data 15, 16. They just did theirs. It's $20 million for a Tennessee level 1 or level 2 trauma center, $20 million average. So when we repeat ours, I'm sure it's going to be over 10 million, but we have to have accurate data. We want clean, fair data. So please just take it seriously, get involved with your finance people. They won't understand call all the time the way you do. So just make sure, and again, if you have any questions, please give me a call. I'm really serious about that. I'll be happy to help you. And then go back to Leon Haley really quick, that slide about Leon. Dr. Haley, just one of the first commission members, founding commission members, was ER physician at Grady, executive director, had super fancy titles. I can't remember them all, but he was very far up. Then went to Florida and was CEO of one of the hospitals there. We've named the survey after him as the Haley model to honor him because he was involved with the first survey and really provided great support. And just, he was killed in an accident a few years ago, just the accident. So tremendous loss to the trauma community. We want to memorialize him, call him as the Haley model, and so he'll continuously be mentioned. Thanks.
Yeah, and then here's the timeline to as far as to you know what to expect in terms of the survey.
The work group's still working on updating the survey to the 2022 ACS standards. So their goal is to release it in April 2025 with an introduction webinar, and they will host optional webinars once a month until it's due September 30th. So we're here to support you guys. Enjoy the GQuip meeting.